Not sure if I've ever told you about the great pilgrimage I took 10 years ago now. It's hard to believe. In 2015, I walked the ancient pilgrimage route known as the Camino in Spain. It's an 800-kilometer pilgrimage. It takes about a month to walk in total. You go from the border of France and Spain, you're walking over the Pyrenees Mountains all the way west through Spain, nearly to the far coast of Spain. And you're going to Santiago de Compostela, which is the place where the relics or the remains of the Apostle St. James are. It was a beautiful month, and I have to say it's the closest I've ever come to setting out, to going into the wilderness, as we hear the Lord in the gospel today. All I had was the backpack that I had to carry the entire way, a few provisions, a few changes of clothes, but every day not knowing honestly where I was going to end up, where I was going to lay my head, what food I was going to have to eat. It was a beautiful experience, and many images and persons and memories come to mind as I think about it, as I near this 10-year anniversary. The Camino is known as the Way, and perhaps you've seen the movie by that name. If you haven't, it's well worth looking up, The Way, which is actually an English translation of an ancient Greek word that is hodos. Hodos means the way in Greek. And it's a theme that comes up over and over in the scriptures. So much so that in the early church, the followers of Jesus were known as followers of the way, followers of hodos. But it's not just a New Testament word. The book of Exodus, which is so well known to us, right? The great story of Moses leading the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt through the desert to the promised land. Well, Exodus, the name of the book itself, comes from that same word, hodos, hodos, which means to lead out on the way. The Israelites being led out of slavery in Egypt. We know the book of Exodus is, that's a small part of it. That they're also led through the road, the way in the desert. They are led into the way, the path, the road into the promised land. It's hodos. It's the way out. It is the way through. It is the way into. This story of the 40 years journey that the Israelite people take, which is reminiscent of the Lord's own 40 days spent in the wilderness, spent in his temptation. Which brings us to our 40 days of Lent, this hodos of our own, in which we are being invited to walk the way. We are being invited to walk the road, the path towards new life. And it's an opportunity for us to think about, as I'm sure we have this past week, the things that we need to walk out of in our lives. The way that we are being invited to perhaps step aside from certain things that have begun in our lives over this past year or the past years, things that we've struggled with, sins that we have been fighting. We're trying to walk out of them. We're trying to walk through, find the way through, so that we might indeed come into that new life, that new experience, that new relationship, the new fervor that we believe God is inviting us to share as his people. The book of Deuteronomy that we read from in our first reading today is written to remind the Israelite people, as Deuteronomy says, of all that God did in leading them out of Egypt, all that God did leading them through the wilderness, all that God did in leading them into the promised land. Deuteronomy is a great book of the law and of prescriptions around worship. What Moses is saying, or what the writer of Deuteronomy is saying, is when you come before God, remember all of those moments in your life in which you were led out, you were led through, you were led into. And this is true in so many different ways in our lives. We can, I'm sure, think of moments in which we were delivered out of, brought through, brought into. And maybe there are things even now in our lives, things that we are still going through, things that we're still entering into, things that we are being led out of. and all of our lives contain a myriad of these different experiences and struggles and joys. What Moses is reminding the people is that when you come to worship God, remember all of it. Don't forget the journey that you have been on, the journey that you are on, the journey that you are invited into with God. For us, as we enter into Lent, it's a time for us, yes, to perhaps step aside or to enter into those great practices of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. These are sort of, they're signposts to help direct us on our way, to help us to be led out of, to be led through, to be led into. When you walk the Camino pilgrimage in Spain, so many pilgrims have walked before that they've in fact put up little signposts along the Camino with a little scallop shell. And all you have to do for 800 kilometers is follow one scallop shell to the next scallop shell. And that's what we are invited to do, to find our way by these works of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. But also to find our way in knowing the story of others who've shared this journey with us. Whether that's the Israelite people in slavery in Egypt, whether that's the Lord himself who says, yes, I will set out into the desert. I will face temptation or testing from the evil one, so that you might also follow that same path, so that you might come out the other side, come out into a new life, a new experience of God, a new fervor in who God has called you to be. We have these signposts. We have this inspiration. And I hope we can also look at our lives and say, these are the ways that I've already experienced this in my life. I'm sure I've mentioned before St. Ignatius of Loyola, great spiritual master. He says that when we are in the moments of desolation, when we are feeling tested or tempted, whatever it is, that we need to look at our lives and remind ourselves of moments of consolation, moments in which we were confident of what the working of God's grace was doing within us and in our lives. And so we find ourselves like the Lord in a place of temptation. We look back and we say, no, I know God has led me out of. I know God has led me through. I know God has led me into this experience, this hodos in my life. And so I don't lose heart. I don't lose confidence. Maybe even we look at the past few days of Lent. If you're anything like me and you say, well, I guess this Lent isn't going to be nothing special. I haven't done so good so far. It's never over. The Lord always wants to renew us every step of the way, every step of the journey. He wants to open up before us the pathway, the road, the hodos, each day to new life. So wherever we find ourselves, let us look for those signposts that help point us towards a Holy Lent, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Let us be inspired by what has come, the participation we have with so many through the ages, the millennia, who have walked this journey of life, of Lent, with us. And also remind ourselves of all that the Lord has done in us, through us, and what God has led us into, what he invites us to share as we gather together for this Lenten season, so that indeed we might find that fullness of life, so that we might enter into the fullness of that Paschal mystery in his in his passion, his death, and in his resurrection, in which is our hope, in which is our pathway, our hodos, to the fullness of life.